The rain poured down in thick sheets, blurring the streets of Denton, Texas, into a watercolor of headlights and broken dreams. Joe Carter, a 38-year-old mechanic with grease-stained hands and a heart that still believed in doing right, stood by the bay of his auto shop, watching the storm pummel the world outside. It had been a quiet day, too quiet. His only customer hadn't shown, the bills were stacking up, and dinner that night would likely be a leftover can of beans. But Joe wasn't one to complain. Life had knocked him around plenty. He'd lost his wife to cancer 6 years ago, and the house they dreamed of together had long been sold off to cover her treatments. Still, he kept his old shop running, kept showing up, and kept believing that maybe, just maybe, the universe still had a little mercy left. As he turned to shut the shop's roll-down gate, something caught his eye. Across the street at the bus stop, a woman in a white wedding dress sat slumped on the bench, mascara running down her face, bouquet discarded by her feet. Her shoulders were shaking, either from the cold or from sobs, he couldn't tell. But she looked like every hope she'd ever had just crumbled beneath her. Joe blinked. Then he crossed the street. "You okay, miss?" he asked, gently. The woman looked up. She had stunning green eyes, the kind that usually lit up a room, but now they looked empty, rimmed with betrayal. "No," she whispered. "Not even close." Joe didn't push. He simply offered his flannel jacket. She hesitated, then took it, shivering as she wrapped it around herself. "My name's Joe. I work at the shop over there. You want to come in, maybe warm up a bit?" She hesitated again, then nodded. Inside the garage, Joe handed her a clean towel and brewed a pot of instant coffee. She finally spoke while gripping the steaming mug with trembling fingers. "I'm Claire," she said. "Claire Emerson. I was supposed to be married today." Joe raised an eyebrow but didn't interrupt. "He didn't show," she continued, her voice breaking. "After all the planning, after all the promises. I waited in front of 200 people. His mom told me he'd left town this morning. Just ran." "I'm sorry," Joe said, his voice steady. Claire gave a bitter laugh. "You're the first person who said that without following it up with some version of, 'You'll be fine,' or, at least you found out now." Joe chuckled softly. "Sounds like people who've never had their heart stepped on." Claire looked around the shop, at the beat-up radio, the worn-out couch, the photos of a woman and a little girl tacked up on a corkboard. "You live here?" "For now. The place used to be my full-time gig, then the housing market crushed everything. I sleep in the office. Cheaper than rent." Claire blinked. "You live here, and still took in a stranger off the street?" Joe shrugged. "Didn't seem right to leave you out there. Some things shouldn't be left broken." She stared at him a long moment. Over the next few hours, Claire told Joe bits and pieces of her story. Her father had passed when she was 16. Her mother remarried and moved to Arizona. She stayed behind in Texas, got her teaching license, fell in love with a man named Bryce. They were together 3 years, until that morning, when he vanished without a trace. No note. No goodbye. She had nowhere to go. Her apartment lease had ended since they were supposed to move into a house together after the honeymoon. "Then you'll stay here tonight," Joe said simply. "I can't ask you to." "You didn't," Joe interrupted kindly. "You don't gotta sleep on a bench in a wedding dress just because the world's been cruel." That night, Claire cried herself to sleep on the old couch in Joe's office while he made a bed for himself in the break room. In the morning, he handed her a breakfast burrito from the food truck next door. And that was how it started. Claire only meant to stay one night. Maybe 2. But the rain didn't let up for days, and neither did Joe's quiet kindness. He didn't ask for anything, not rent, not explanations. Instead, he offered her a space heater, a stack of old books, and a place to rest her wounded spirit. In return, Claire began to help around the shop. At first, it was small things, organizing shelves, answering phone calls. But Joe quickly realized she had a knack for talking to customers. With her help, more people started showing up. Business picked up. And day by day, Claire found herself laughing again. Joe never crossed a line. Never made her feel like she owed him anything. But his gentle presence, his honest, working-man humility, began to chip away at the wall around her heart. 3 weeks in, they sat under the stars outside the garage, sipping cold sodas and watching the sky. "You ever think life gives you second chances?" she asked. Joe looked up. "I used to. Then I stopped. But lately." Claire smiled. "Me too." Then, one afternoon, a glossy black car pulled into the shop. Out stepped Bryce. Claire froze. "Claire," he said, running up to her. "I made a mistake. I panicked. I wasn't ready, but I am now. Please, come back." Joe quietly stepped back, giving them space. Claire looked at Bryce. "You left me. On our wedding day." "I know. I was scared. But I've had time to think. We can still make it work." She glanced over at Joe, who was pretending not to listen as he tinkered under the hood of a pickup. He didn't look over. Didn't interfere. Claire turned back to Bryce. "No," she said. "We can't." And for the first time in weeks, she stood tall, shoulders back, head high. "I don't know what scared you more, commitment, or me being strong enough to live without you. But I found something real here. I found peace. And I found someone who didn't try to fix me, just gave me space to heal." Bryce's face flushed with shock. But Claire had already turned away. That evening, Claire walked into the garage, her hands shaking. "He's gone," she said. Joe nodded, still working on a tire. "I told him no." Joe looked up, his eyes warm. "You okay?" Claire exhaled deeply. "Yeah. I think I am." Weeks turned into months. Claire began teaching again at a local school. Joe's business continued to grow, thanks in part to her organization and marketing skills. The shop got a new coat of paint. The radio was replaced. But the old couch stayed. One morning, Joe found Claire sitting on it, staring at a photo of his late wife. "You loved her a lot," she said softly. "Still do," Joe replied. "Always will." Claire nodded. "Do you think it's possible to love again? Without it being a betrayal?" Joe met her gaze. "Love isn't a replacement. It's a continuation. And hearts, they're bigger than we give them credit for." She smiled, and something in her heart finally clicked into place. 1 year later, the shop was packed, not with cars, but with folding chairs, wildflowers, and townsfolk who had watched something beautiful grow from something broken. Claire, in a simple blue dress, walked down the aisle not to a church, but to the very garage where her life had fallen apart, and where it had begun again. Joe stood waiting with a shy grin and oil still under his fingernails. The town buzzed for weeks. The poor mechanic who took in a heartbroken bride, and won her heart. But for Joe and Claire, it wasn't about the headlines. It was about second chances. About kindness that expects nothing. About how healing can start with something as small as a cup of coffee, a warm flannel, and someone who doesn't walk away. In the end, Joe didn't just fix cars. He helped fix a heart. And together, they built a life richer than anything money could ever buy.